Anna noted, my name is Isaac Zaworski. I'm the president of Sectra US, and I could not be more excited to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker today. We're very proud of our partnership with SIM, and we're obviously very excited to have the opportunity to sponsor this series. We're very passionate about the enterprise imaging space and this kind of amazing transformation that our community is going through right now. So I think extremely excited to be able to introduce today Dr. Christine Ramirez. She's the Associate Chief Medical Information Officer and also an acute care surgeon, which I think is a really interesting and unique perspective in this dialogue from St. Luke's University Health Network. And so without further ado, Dr. Ramirez, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and I will look forward to joining the conversation later.
Thank you very much, Isaac. I also want to thank SIM and Sectra for providing me with the opportunity to discuss my experiences regarding enterprise imaging SaaS implementation. I don't have any disclosures to start. I'm also very passionate about this, and it is unusual, I know, as an acute care surgeon, but here we are. Just move my slide. So just a little background. So I work for St. Luke's University Health Network. We're a health system that's comprised of 15 campuses, and 13 of which are hospitals, and over 350 outpatient facilities. And we're located in Pennsylvania, so we provide care in the eastern part, known as the Lehigh Valley area, and also the western part of New Jersey. And our network has one enterprise EHR vendor and one PACS vendor, and we're also very fortunate to have one radiology group who manages over 1.1 million radiology exams a year. So our PACS system is currently used for, our current state PACS system is used for traditional service lines, as you can expect. So radiology, cardiology, mammo. And then we also do point of care ultrasound and endoscopy with Epic Lumens, which is our EHR vendor for integration. Our current state short-term storage is on-prem, but our long-term storage is in the cloud. And one of the difficulties that our PACS infrastructure deals with, which most organizations probably deal with, is just the inability to support remote reading past a certain geographical distance. So once we go past Louisiana or some 200 something miles, there's a lot of latency issues, especially when you're talking about breast imaging or those large image studies. We also want to obviously integrate more artificial intelligence tools, and that also is a lot of big data, a lot of memory, a lot of latency issues. So the other thing that I'm very passionate about is that enterprise imaging is no longer just radiology and cardiology. So clinical imaging is everywhere in healthcare. For me, from the minute my patient goes in the door as a trauma patient, I'm doing a point of care ultrasound. I'm taking pictures of their wounds. I'm taking them to the operating room where I want to be able to take surgical videos, images, and whatnot. So if you think about all of these clinical imaging, when we started looking at St. Luke's, we had over 30 workflows, clinical service lines that had these workflows, and they were all siloed. Maybe some didn't have storage solutions and whatnot. And overall, it leads to an inefficient end system and also dissatisfaction. So when we started our enterprise imaging journey a couple of years ago, our primary goal was actually to find an enterprise storage and workflow solution that could support all of our unique non-traditional clinical imaging modalities. So when we started looking, our ideal enterprise imaging solution had a lot of necessities in it. So number one, we wanted a vendor-neutral archive where we could store all the images. This is, how we could break down our storage silos, we could simplify workflows, improve data accessibility and interoperability. Number two, we wanted a centralized image access platform where clinicians and patients have a single point of access to view and manage all patient imaging data. This, we preferred it through Epic, our EHR, and obviously that would also improve our usability and functionality of the solution. And then we were also looking for a solution that would enhance clinical imaging workflows with enhanced diagnostic tools. So 3D reconstruction, integration with third-party and AI tools, a scalable marketplace, and basically how can we improve interoperability with all of our workflows together. Best case scenario, we were looking for a one-stop solution that could meet all of our clinical imaging needs as much as possible. So, in our roadmap, we had ophthalmology, digital pathology. We're interested in research and development. And then we were looking for a vendor that was in alignment with our own future roadmap. So we also wanted a cloud storage solution if we could. So that was a no-brainer for us. Cloud storage is superior to on-prem for its easy scalability for both storage and bandwidth. I'm very passionate about this too. It's really critical to deal with how our storage requirements are rapidly increasing that we're seeing with big data, with AI, data analytics. And cloud just enables organizations to do this better. It also enhances our availability and usability. And so we would be able to expand our remote reading capabilities and telepresence with cloud. Cybersecurity, as everyone knows, that's also becoming increasingly critical. And cloud, in my opinion, is a great solution to ensure that our data is available 24/7, 365. So if you have cloud, it's easier to replicate data to provide backups to ensure business continuity if there is, God forbid, a cybersecurity attack. There's resiliency with redundancy, and it's not as easy to replicate that with on-premise solutions. There's a cost to it, there's a maintenance perspective to it, and cloud, takes that out of the equation for a cost, obviously. And the other thing is that with regional data centers, you can facilitate data redundancy in various regions to mitigate data loss and natural disasters. So St. Luke's is unique in that aspect because we have strong partnerships with Epic and Microsoft. We already embrace cloud solutions. So we were one of the first large health systems to put Epic on Azure. So we have cloud data backups. We have disaster recoveries already in place. So for example, we do a biannual switchover from one Azure region to another to drill for disaster recovery. And we were looking for an enterprise imaging solution that could do the same. And then last but not least is software as a service, or SaaS, is another ideal feature due to cost effectiveness, scalability, management, less management and maintenance on the side of our teams. So with SaaS, healthcare systems don't need to worry about hardware, software upgrades, all these things that I mentioned. And instead, our IT staff can really focus from back-end support to front-end clinical support. How do we optimize our clinical and operational workflows to enhance productivity and patient care? Because that is the most important thing at the end of the day. So one of the last things, most important requirements, as Isaac mentioned, when we were looking for a vendor, is we wanted a partner. We wanted a partner that was in alignment with our ideas and priorities when it came to enterprise imaging, roadmap, innovation, and security. And we found that, with Sectra, we engaged with Sectra at all levels. We were going down to multiple weekly meetings with our team, Sectra's team, security, infrastructure. We went to headquarters in Connecticut. That's where I met Isaac. But the whole team. And then we also had a lot of meetings with a lot of Sectra's current customers. I went to Sectra's annual user group meeting, and that was really a great opportunity for us to get feedback on customer experiences and to figure out how we were going to accomplish our enterprise imaging goals. And one of the things, when we were looking was, what are the potential pitfalls that we have, and, how do we plan accordingly? And that was really important when we were developing our implementation plans. So basically, from all of our feedback, all of our work that we did coming into contracting, is we were able to develop and document a very detailed multi-year implementation plan. It was aligned between both my organization, St. Luke's, and Sectra's. And we had these back and forth dialogues to figure out how we were going to meet all of our imaging requirements. And again, we were able to find our potential pitfalls. So once we finalized our strategy, there's the race to the finish line. But, I like to think about enterprise imaging implementation like a triathlon, right? Especially if you're trying to implement multiple imaging modules that integrates dozens of clinical workflows. So, you've got radiology, cardiology is one thing, but digital pathology is something. Clinical imaging is the Wild West, especially when you start talking about patient images, surgical videos, things that don't have set standards like DICOM does. And so when you talk about successfully implementing each module, there's a lot of planning that has to go into it. There's a lot of steps. So obviously you have to set up an infrastructure. You have to establish connectivity from multiple imaging systems to the VNA, and then also to Epic or your EHR and other third-party software systems. You're going to have to migrate data, design workflow, configure, and then also, most importantly, is you have to have a training and education plan. Right? Without training and a really great, strong, robust plan, that may affect your end user success and satisfaction. I also want to highlight post-go live plan because that's also necessary for continuous improvement and to help improve the success or subsequent implementation phases. And it's a lot. My ultimate goal at St. Luke's is I would love every single clinical imaging to be part of our VNA, to be part of enterprise imaging. But there's a lot of dependencies involved. And so you really have to prep before, during, and after the contract signing process. So, we started with our project model. I like to think about what are the key pieces you need to be successful. And there's four things that I could really put them into categories. So number one, you want to make sure you have the right project plan. Number two, obviously the right timeline. And those are very closely related. You need to have the right stakeholders involved throughout. And then number four is you want to make sure you have the right support team. It's important to remember that all of these phases in your plan won't deploy in a linear fashion. So, for St. Luke's, we decided to have 3 project managers that were focused on different aspects of the project. So we have one project manager who is the overall person that you would think is the typical project manager, focused on the core team and implementing each project phase. But then we also have an infrastructure project manager who's very focused right now on how do we set up our infrastructure, our connectivity to the cloud, and all those other pieces for data migration and all of that. And then third is we have an operationals project manager that helps identify the clinical stakeholders so that we can start developing an enterprise imaging governance team and develop a training plan for each project and each stakeholder group. By utilizing 3 different project managers allows the main project manager to focus on the current phase at hand. It's also important to note that some phases probably require more work than others. So while you're implementing one phase, it might be necessary to start discovery on the project that's next in your timeline. And that way you can identify and allocate resources to the pre-planning. So you're going to need to identify key dependencies, prerequisites, and that might dictate your timeline. And so things are always guaranteed to change. I mean, that's what projects are, especially if you have a multi-year timeline. So it's also really critical to continuously review these priorities and adjust when needed. So communication is key. And I'm going to be saying that throughout my presentation here. So as I stated, we collaborated with Sectra. So we developed an implementation plan pre-contract signing. So we were able to, with this plan, then go into detail while we were going through contract signing, waiting for a project manager. Normally once you sign a contract, that might be a couple months before you get a project manager. But that doesn't mean, hey, let me just wait until I get a project manager. You want to start your plan beforehand. We started, looking at our plan, again, pre-contract. We determined it based on our clinical needs. So when you start thinking about your plan, what imaging workflows need a solution urgently? This could be because your system's not stable, or you don't have a solution and you need something now because of various requirements. You might identify that you have some clinical workflows that have a solution. It could be better, but they can wait. You can bridge it until, phase 2 or phase 3. And then third would be, hey, this is a nice to have. They're doing okay with their workflow. We can bring it in later as we continue implementation. The other thing that impacted our timeline was what workflows are easier to implement. So, when you talk about DICOM standards or radiology, cardiology, those are pretty cookie cutter to a point, right? So people are already doing that. Point of care ultrasound, although the workflows are complex, there is DICOM standards in place. So that might be easier to implement than non-DICOM workflows where you have to vet it in more detail. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Once we developed a high-level multi-year project plan, then we started deep diving into the requirements. So within each phase, if you want to break it up into modules, so like radiology, cardiology, or point of care ultrasound, or clinical imaging, OR images, things like that, you really have to think about, do you need additional hardware or software? Again, clinical imaging there's a lot of variability in vendors and, recording things. So you might need to obtain middleware. And you need to make sure things are compatible. So that's going to take more time and effort and money. You need to identify who the stakeholders are who are going to be involved in each phase, especially when you're developing workflows. So, I can speak for clinical imaging in the operating room is I need to really identify where does the surgeon need to be and what workflow to edit their videos. Do we have to get legal involved from that perspective? How long do we want to limit these videos? Do we want it to be a 3-hour video or cut it down to 1 hour? So there are a lot of decisions that can go into these workflows and a lot of variability that needs to be standardized. Um, and then who will be supporting the workflows for each phase? And is the support and type and amount adequate? Because if it's not, you might need to hire more people, you might need to hire consultants, or you may need to rethink these workflows. And I kind of mentioned it earlier, but you also need to identify the dependencies for each phase. So, for example, for PACS, theoretically or usually, you can't really go live until you have adequate data that's migrated from your legacy system to your new system. So most importantly is your plan should never be really locked down. When we started our high level plan, we had plan A, plan B, plan C. And what we found was once we got to contract signing is we decided to move up our timeline. So where clinical imaging, as I mentioned initially, was, we wanted to be able to store OR images sooner or clinical workflows sooner. We ended up deciding as we signed the contract to move radiology up first or sooner. So things will change. It's expected. And you want to make sure that your support team can support it. And so when we decided to move that up, we obviously had to move other things back down the prioritization list. So that's anticipated. So once you figure out the high level plan, you then have to ensure the timeline makes sense based on what's scoped in each phase. So I've kind of highlighted it a little bit, but number one is you want to make sure there are budgetary, can you meet the budgetary requirements? Do you have to secure more funding to bring in new hardware and software to implement something? Digital pathology, I think that's a great example is, we might have to bring in new scopes to be able to implement that. So that's going to need its own funding. And that might lead you to delay the project until you can secure that hardware, which is a prerequisite for success. Support requirements is if your IT team is busy supporting one phase, but you need them to support a subsequent phase, you might need to delay your implementation until your team is ready. Alternatively, if you can deploy another team to begin implementation of subsequent phases, you could potentially overlap phases. So to give an example, right now, our project team is working on breast imaging, radiology, all of that implementation, but I have another team who primarily focuses on OR imaging, and we've started deep diving into their requirements to be able to save OR images. So that way we can do things in tandem or overlap. Number three, as I mentioned, is the governance. If the workflow is complex, you're going to need governance to develop standards and protocols and how images are going to be stored and accessed within the VNA. Again, clinical imaging is the Wild West, especially if you open up the media tab of your EMR. I like to call it the kitchen junk drawer, as there's a lot of images in there. And how do you develop standards so that those images can be appropriately accessed in your VNA? We don't want to say, hey, let's just put all of these images and connect it to our VNA without those standards already in place, or that's going to turn into a kitchen drawer, which we don't want. So again, setting standards and governance is really critical, and that's going to take time. That's going to require robust clinical leadership. That's going to require stakeholder involvement. And as a result, you might want to put those workflows a little later in your timeline. And then, as I mentioned also, is training. How many end users are going to be impacted by each workflow? How much training is going to be required? Because support can vary from e-learnings, online, training curriculum, train-the-trainer models, or all the way up to at-the-elbow support. It really depends on each workflow. Some things are intuitive, some things require at-the-elbow support. You might need to hire consultants or training teams or additional support. It really depends on your organization. And then, as mentioned, each phase may have its prerequisites for dependencies. So, we can't start clinical imaging implementation until our VNA is set up. Just like we can't start PACS go live until our data is appropriately migrated. So I've kind of hinted on this in terms of you want to make sure you design the right support team structure. So this is where our partnership with Sectra was really, really helpful because we had a lot of dialogue with our vendor about this. Your vendor should be able to provide advice and best practices, guide your preparations. We also had reference calls, as I mentioned earlier, and they gave us their experiences on go lives. For example, one organization said, hey, soft go lives might be the place to go. It really cut down our ticket time when we went live. We also found the advice from vendors and reference sites to be helpful to help when we were going through a review of our existing teams. We've made adjustment based on our timeline, our stakeholders, and our plan. As training and our IT teams, they're going to be the horse behind the scenes to make, or the heroes, sorry, the heroes behind the scenes to make this possible. So you really need to dive into what your current state is, and do you need to hire new people or more people to make this a success? So for St. Luke's, what we decided, again, we decided to involve our project management team early on. So that way everyone was on board, all the support team from infrastructure, security, project management, our PAC support team, and also our clinical imaging teams that were already managing third-party vendors. They were all involved. We decided to restructure our IT support team. And the reason why is that our current state is focused on break fix. It's on infrastructure, all the back end things that you can think of. But future state with SaaS implementation, as I've mentioned, is we want a team that can focus more on front end support, clinical support. And that might need to change, as I mentioned. Do you need more people who are trained with SIP or informatics based or have clinical experience? We're still trying to discover that, but we do know that the support team will have to change in some way. Whether it means training our current support team to be able to support front end or not, whatnot, we're still figuring that out. So we also developed a new internal support structure roadmap. So we hired a new enterprise imaging director, which he's been fantastic. He's had experience with Sectra, so he can help guide us with that. We knew talking to Sectra that we're going to need a Sectra system administrator, a VNA administrator. These are a little bit new roles compared to the classic PACS administrator. And then because of our high-level roadmap, we also have planned phasing in new FTE throughout each project phase. And eventually our goal is to consolidate all clinical imaging applications under one enterprise imaging team. Other steps we're still going through is trying to figure out, how are we going to optimize our training team and expand that so we can provide at the elbow support for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. And future state two is, as we incorporate clinical imaging or enterprise imaging, we're going to have more AI tools. Do we need to expand our data analytics and AI team so that we can support that? So the fourth piece is stakeholders. Everybody knows stakeholder involvement is essential. You want to obviously ensure that you have adequate resources and budget, and you want to maximize collaboration and satisfaction. So key stakeholders that I always talk about, number one, obviously executive leadership, right? So for us, as we changed our timeline, we were in very close communication with our executive leadership, and they were behind us 100% so that we could make that successful. You also want to identify each service line clinical stakeholders, who's going to be your super user, who are your clinical leaders. So, we've developed basically project leadership groups and also working groups for each phase so that we know, hey, for surgical imaging, we're going to need our chair of surgery. These are our super users who are going to help with train-the-trainer support. Or these are the other stakeholders who can help us develop our workflows or our standards or be part of our enterprise imaging governance. You're going to need administration. So this includes legal, risk, coding compliance, and billing teams. So I would also get them involved early so they have a heads up on, this is what we're embarking on. This is going to be a multi-year plan. Are there any things that we need to worry about before we get started? And then obviously your IT stakeholders, as I mentioned, they are, critical. So infrastructure, security, imaging support team, all of that. So you want to make sure you keep leadership engaged throughout your project. Communication is key. And then also, I mentioned it earlier, but just to highlight on enterprise imaging governance, that's going to be critical even early on to determine role-based access. What user roles are going to need access to, IDS7 or the module versus who can use the zero footprint viewers. So that's something we're looking through too at our institution. Role-based access is also going to be really critical when you're dealing with clinical imaging studies. So, when I joke about neurology in terms of sleep studies is, I don't want somebody who can go on my chart and see me sleeping for 9 hours, right? So you want to develop those role-based access so the right people can see the right studies, and those who don't have access or shouldn't have access don't have access. So key learning so far, we are still in our phase, our project phase. So, we signed our contract just a few months ago. We are going through an accelerated timeline with plans to implement PACS and radiology within less than a year. So we're going very rapidly on that. And as I mentioned, our timeline has changed even throughout that. We've had a great support system, and the best advice I can give is that communication is key. You really have to continuously review priorities and adjust things when needed. I always say that projects have risk. Nothing ever goes to plan. I mean, I'm a trauma surgeon, so that's what I do. But I also think that the tighter the timeline, the higher the need to be agile. You're going to have to adjust for priorities, resource, and support changes. And I think that communication is really critical to make sure everyone is lockstep as these changes occur. The other advice I'd say is just to make sure there's a process built in for continuous improvement. So, when you implement one phase of the project, go back and say, hey, did we do this well? Or do we need to improve it? Do we need to change our training plan or implementation plan? Is there support not there? Do we need to hire more people? All of that. We're just trying to figure that out, but it's really important to be open for that. And then don't forget to, get reviews from your operations team to make sure they're happy, because that can also affect your project's success. So, any questions? I'll turn it back to Isaac.
I was going to say that was wonderful. This is that wonderful time in the webinar agenda where we get to reach out to all the participants who are on board, and I will encourage you to please use the Q&A function in the platform to be able to submit any questions that you have or thoughts or considerations for further discussion. I think while we let the crowd work on that, maybe I'll start with one leading question, perhaps. In my experience, certainly with customers who are working through this journey, your organization are a little bit unique. You mentioned it up front, but you guys were very early to the party in making the choice to transition enterprise level applications into the cloud, so off-prem, and make the shift away from owning and managing your own infrastructure. And you're very early on in the journey to transition Epic up there, which I have to imagine was a non-trivial sort of project on its own. Are there any kind of learnings or lessons learned from the organization's experience with that kind of first large-scale enterprise transition that have guided your approach to how to take on this enterprise imaging journey?
Right, great question. So, as mentioned, because we've already had experience with it, and I obviously can't take credit, that is our chief security officer, that's where the communication between Sectra and St. Luke's was key. Because we said, hey, this is what we're doing in Epic, with Epic. Can you guys do that as well? And when I say, resiliency, redundancy, I mean, I'm talking, 2 different regions, a on-prem emergency downtime system. If my CISO had his way, we'd probably have 4 backups in the cloud with a cold storage and and a hot storage and things like that. So just I would say talking with your vendor just to see if that is possible. The other piece I would say is having your infrastructure team on board to do that. So with current state prem, it's a lot of databases, a lot of on-premise data centers, and you're going to have to switch. It's going to change your infrastructure significantly. So, and then again, with the rapid implementation, as we were signing our contract, we were already getting our ducks in a row, so to speak. So we already had figured out this is where we're going to put our emergency downtime system. We know that we need to have these express route connectivities. Where are we going to do that? So we had already planned for that ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that's probably a huge advantage on your side of things. Certainly, as I think about the experiences that similar organizations are having, the first time around when your infrastructure teams in your IT organization is kind of having to learn what it means to take the network infrastructure that you've invested so much in internally on and look at how to connect it into the public cloud infrastructure. That all the tools and pieces are there. Obviously, this is not something that you're doing for the first time. Many other organizations have done it, but you have to learn it. The organizational learning takes some time, some effort, and I think, as you highlighted, I think you guys have done a phenomenal job of leveraging the community resources, reaching out to others who have done these things before, and I think that's a really good lesson learned for everyone. I think you brought up the cybersecurity topic as well a couple of times, and I think that's a really interesting one. A couple of years ago, I know that the discussions that I was having at the market level were kind of open questions around, can we treat the cloud or a SaaS provider as a secure solution? How do we think about relinquishing control of our data, or our patients' data in this context, to other organizations? Can you maybe expand a little bit on the kind of the discussions and the way that you guys have arrived at the strategy that you're taking, where you have been able to develop that level of comfort and be willing to relinquish control?
Yes. So that, that is a common concern, as you stated, is, relinquishing that control and being willing to do that. And so I think that is really where we said we need a partner, because it's not just, hey, let's just give our data to a vendor that, we paid it to do a service. We want somebody that we trust, somebody we know is in line with our requirements, or our goals and vision. And when I talk about Sectra, I mean, that, but just one of the things is, I mean, you guys are a security company, so, and that was very critical for us to say, hey, you guys know security, this is what you do. You're not just, I used to be a PACS vendor and then let me just add security on. No, security is number one in what Sectra is. Obviously I don't want to speak for you guys, but that was one of the deciding factors when we decided to go with you guys.
Yeah, we appreciate that. I think you can't go a day looking at the news without recognizing just how important cybersecurity is, and how big a risk it is for all organizations across the board, right? All right, so we have. Oh,
Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, so we have a good question that came in through the Q&A side of things, which is actually a topic that has come up in a couple other discussions leading up to the SIM conference here in a month or so. It's definitely going to be a topic for some of the stage panels as well. Question is, are you standardizing on Microsoft Azure just as a single cloud option, or are you thinking about a strategy for adopting a multi-cloud approach as an organization for enterprise imaging or broadly? This would include disaster recovery as well.
Yeah, so for us, because we have strong partnerships with Microsoft as well. If we can, we would like to standardize with one cloud vendor.
Yeah.
So, it's easier that way. Now, obviously, when you start talking about third-party vendors who have their platforms in the cloud too, and they say, ideally, if we can, we will look to say, can we store the data in our tenant? But some vendors don't support that.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good transition to also talk about kind of the implications of choosing the SaaS path, the software as a service path, because obviously the cloud platform is a relevant thing, but in reality, it's a relationship where you're no longer thinking about managing the cloud platform on your end. This is a responsibility that you're handing over to us, and us as the vendor are having the opportunity to focus and specialize on which platform makes the most sense for delivering a service with some level of service level, which is what we commit to you as an organization. Are there other major implications of the choice to choose a software as a service offering versus thinking about replacing your PACS with a kind of cloud hosted sort of application that kind of drove your decision making?
Yeah, so when you think about maintenance and optimization updates, SaaS is, I mean, it's ideal because I don't have to worry about the downtimes or the implementing the infrastructure to upgrade. It'll just happen magically for my clinicians. We'll just wake up one day and hey, Sectra is optimized, right? I don't know if it really works that way, but the other piece of it is that I thought was amazing is the third party tools, the marketplace, the all of that, those features. When you look at UniView or IDS7, a lot of features are already embedded within the viewer. And so for end users, the usability is phenomenal and interoperability integration. And so when you talk about SaaS, is that's already going to happen. I don't have to plan that in my update timeline, a couple months from now if we get the infrastructure support there. So I think SaaS is the way to go for that.
Yeah, and I have to imagine, I mean, you from your clinical perspective are going to be feeling it probably very acutely. But one of the things that we certainly see from the vendor and developer side of things is that historically we've been very frustrated with the fact that we will interact with customers and talk through new features and functions to develop, and it can take 2 years from development to actual clinical end users being able to benefit from it because these are big applications. The upgrade, as you highlight, the upgrade timelines are long, and then it's the training that has to come out from a big, massive upgrade at any given point in time. Are you looking forward to having an opportunity to have smaller, more frequent updates that reach you much, much faster?
Yes, that's a leading question, but definitely.
Yeah, it is
Yes.
a little bit of a leading question, but we're very excited about it too.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a couple more questions that have come in from the audience. So first, going back to the comments about Epic and Sectra, there's a question about whether or not you are going to need any middleware to support imaging workflows, e.g. worklist orchestrators or something like that, especially from the AI tool-based optimizers perspective, or were you able to achieve everything with Epic and Sectra?
So we are still working on our implementation process. So I'll probably have more information for you that in about a year or so. But what I will say is that with, let's say, radiology tools or whatnot, if it's in the Sectra marketplace, it gets integrated, especially with SaaS. You can, roll it out, whatnot. There's AI marketplace and things like that. And I think that's one of the highlights of Sectra is that you guys offer that solution. So before we go look at a third party vendor or a custom work list or something else, we can go to Sectra and say, hey, do you have this? Is this in your roadmap? And will it be integrated? And we don't have to worry about that. For other solutions, so let's say point of care ultrasound, that's also very near and dear to my heart because point of care ultrasound is a lot different from typical encounters based, appointment based workflows. So there's customization involved. And again, this is where partnership is really strong because we sat down with Sectra. We said, hey, this is what we're thinking. These are the potential workflows we want. Is this possible? And Sectra, you guys are great because you said, hey, let us work on this. Let us figure out a game plan together to do that. And then, other things is you are going to need third-party middleware. So when you talk about surgical imaging, like being able to not record videos, but edit videos and all of that. That's not a capability yet of Sectra, but
Yeah.
so right now, I will need middleware, but future state to
Yeah.
be determined. Yeah.
Now, I think one of the really exciting things about kind of the broader enterprise imaging movement and approach as a whole is um, that you really get to this place where having robust interfaces is critical. So I think part of it is just being able to think about interfaces in the context of how do I get all this data in. But on the other end, it also makes you think about how you have good, robust, secure interfaces that enable third parties or customers to be able to interact with the data once it's in the VNA or once it's actually in the system itself, right? And that becomes really powerful when you start thinking about the kind of next level applications that can provide clinical value for sure.
Mhm.
All right, one more question. How long did it take your organization to come to the decision on Sectra, and how many vendors did you compare? Did you bring your clinical leaders to the table to make this decision?
Yeah. So we started our enterprise imaging journey. I want to say about 4 years ago. Um, but when we came down to RFP and looking at vendors, we had four vendors in the running. And I want to say we came to the decision pretty quickly in the sense of we knew what we wanted going in, right? So we already defined it. And so when we sent out our RFP, we said, this is where we want to be. We want digital pathology. We want point of care. We want all of these. And can you do it or can you not? I went to RSNA. I'm probably the only trauma surgeon who's ever been to RSNA. And they were all, and we looked at these vendors and we said, can you do all of these? And a lot of it is they're not there yet. And so for us, it was, I don't want to say simple, but we came to the decision pretty quickly.
Yeah. Um, it's so interesting thinking about the fact that you as a trauma surgeon ended up at RSNA, but I think it's great. And I think it's kind of indicative of this larger change that enterprise imaging represents across the board, right? Historically, you can think about PAC systems being these relatively monolithic systems that were driven by highly specialized radiologists and the IT organizations that were kind of built to support them across the board. One of the biggest changes with the enterprise imaging concept is that all of a sudden your list of stakeholders has grown immensely. I think you highlighted that in your presentation. You also commented on governance. Can you maybe expand a little bit on the importance or the kind of the thought process and how to develop and kind of implement a governance structure that has to cross so many different stakeholder groups inside your organization?
Yeah. So just going back to when we were looking at vendors and coming up with our timeline, we did involve clinical stakeholders, which started out with leaders to decide, what do we want to store in our VNA? So that's just going back to the previous question I forgot to answer. But what did we want to store in our VNA? And those same stakeholders help make our decision and are also part of our governance that we have. And I'm sure the governance team will grow. But the thing is that, again, with radiology images, we already have workflows that are built. We have standards, and you're going to need some governance, in essence, to develop hanging protocols or all these radiology things that I'm learning. Um, but but there is no governance when it comes to clinical imaging. So let's say right now, if I want to take a patient images, wound care, right?
Mhm.
I don't have to say this is a right leg wound. I can just type whatever I want. There's no standard to it. And how do you prevent, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, how do you prevent your VNA from becoming a junk drawer?
Yeah.
Is you want to make sure you don't have junk coming in. So you need governance to say, we're only going to take these images. This is the workflow you're going to follow to save those images. These are going to be our data retention policies or storage capabilities. And this is who is going to have access to these images. So that's where governance is going to be needed to answer all of those questions.
And have you had a pretty positive response from the clinicians as you've been working through the kind of definition and implementation of that governance?
Yeah. So right now, when we're doing radiology, or radiology, mammo, all of that, that's already pretty set in stone, as mentioned. My next on the docket is surgical images,
Yeah.
um, and surgeons, we just want to be able to save images. So so yes, I will probably have to tell a bariatric surgeon, and I'm half joking, but you can't take a 10-hour video and store it in our VNA. We might need to cut it down. But overall, just having the ability to save images and access it easily and refer back to it and improve patient care, it's being very well received.
Yeah.
So
Well, maybe as a kind of step back and zoom out question, as you now have crossed over the threshold of contract signing or a few months into the project execution side of things, and you can have your head up to be able to see at least the finish line for the initial phases of this, what are you most excited for in the next year or so moving forward?
Everything. I think it's switching, the viewer is the clinician satisfaction. That's what I'm looking forward to. The interoperability, the usability, all of that to say, hey, I can, have these images on my phone and I can take care of a patient who's in a different campus. And basically just consolidating all of our silos into one location. That's what I'm looking forward to the most.
Yeah. It's amazing how in our daily lives we've become so accustomed to having the ability to have access to the same things on any device and any media anywhere, and yet in a clinical setting that has been so elusive for so long.
Absolutely.
It'll be fun to be able to help you get there. So we're
Yes.
really excited to be able to move that forward as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I think we have wrapped up the questions that were in the Q&A panel at this point in time. So unless there are any stragglers out there, maybe I will hand it back to Anna at this point in time, and she can provide us some guidance on what happens next.
Yes, but I do see one more question that just popped
one
up
more.
if you want to go
I love
through
it. Always with the stragglers. All right, last question then. Do your rads want to see those images? Oh, that's an interesting.
No, they do not.
Yeah, I think that's a really an interesting topic and one that has come up in a number of discussions that we've had. The how the radiology profession is going to have to evolve in a world where these images exist is going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, I do think that is where role-based access is key, so that not only you can see what you should be seeing, but also everyone else can't see what they don't want to see.
Yeah.
So, and then just going on to an earlier question, just to piggyback, is that, we are working through making custom work lists. So we are a robust teaching institution, and how can we make work lists that are for Q&A or point of care ultrasound, or kind of make our own little ologies? And that's where I think the awesome features of, UniView, IDS7, all that stuff comes into play, is that we can customize that for each service line.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, with that, I think we get to hand it back to you, Anna.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you, Dr. Ramirez. Thank you, Isaac, for a great webinar today. Again, to all the attendees, thank you for joining us. We'd love your feedback on the survey. You can find it in this webinar product under My Learning in your MySim account. We always love to get your thoughts, recommendations, suggestions that we can improve upon with our future webinars and offer things that are relevant to you and your education. And yeah, thank you so much. Again, thank you to Sectra. Thank you, Dr. Ramirez. And we look forward to hopefully seeing everybody at the SIM annual meeting on June 27, 29 in National Harbor. Have a great day, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.